Today I want to talk about my beef with the devil, specifically the devil archetype in tarot. And one of the things that's been annoying me lately in the tarot community is this tendency to turn the devil archetype into something positive, like something benign, something empowering. They're like, oh, no. The devil archetype doesn't mean anything bad. It just means sexual liberation or personal empowerment or letting your hair down, letting loose. And I'm like, no, it's not. Can we stop, please? Can we stop trying to take things that we're afraid of and turn them into cute little puppy dogs? Like, can we stop? A lot of people, when they get negative cards in the tarot deck, like the devil or the tower or the 3 of swords or the 10 of swords, people have a tendency to not embrace the card's meaning because they're afraid of those archetypes. And to be fair, I get it. It's scary when you're doing a reading and all of a sudden the devil card comes up because it means that there's something wrong. It means that there's something dangerous. But it's important. Those elements exist in humanity, and it's important for us to acknowledge them. When we manipulate or we twist or we reframe archetypal meanings to fit something completely different, the only person that you're doing a disservice to is yourself. And this whole thing sparked in me because I was working through this book called the Tarot Almanac, where for each month they pick a different card to analyze and journal throughout the year. And of course, the card for January was the devil. And as I'm reading this book, the author of this book, totally does this. Instead of talking about how the devil archetype is about temptation and addiction and obsession and denial and negative behavior and narcissism, she instead rephrases it as, there are no right and wrong. I'm reading from the book. There are no right or wrong. There are no wrong desires. And I'm like, really? Because yeah, I definitely think there are. There are definitely right or wrong desires, for sure. She's like, unburden your brain. Know that no one outside of you can call the shots. And I'm like, okay, this is just self-empowering nonsense. This has nothing to do with the tarot archetype of the devil. And then she goes on to say things like, explore the devil landscapes where buttoned up brushes against the more beast-like. Imagine after-work parties, after-hours dance clubs, dance floors, and displays of emotion in public places. That's what she says down here. And I'm like, okay, this is not the devil archetype. Going to the dance floor and letting your hair down is not the archetype of the devil. And if anything, that's the reverse hierophant. We have other cards in the deck that talk about being silly, being carefree, letting loose, like the Fool, or indulging, like the 9 of Cups or the 9 of Pentacles. There's lots of other cards that mean this thing. But the devil is a very, very specific archetype that does not mean those things. And when we take it and we twist it as being a rebel, oh, you're so cool. No, the devil archetype is about lying to oneself, saying that, oh, I'm just being a rebel. I'm just letting myself loose a little bit. It's totally harmless. And then you wake up the next morning and you're a full-blown alcoholic and you're homeless on the street. That's the devil archetype. It's this very little insidious thing that slowly destroys and corrupts our life. And this new age grift where people are so desperate to rename the devil archetype into something more palatable is definitely something that grinds my gears. It's something I think is a disservice to tarot and tarot readers, and it's a disservice to your client because you're not being honest. You're not facing the fear within this archetype. Instead, you're trying to make it something more palatable, something positive. And it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to reflect elements within humanity that lead to self-destruction, elements that might lead to, ego or denial, control, sabotage, narcissism. The list goes on. When you actually study the archetype of the devil, it's a very fascinating archetype. But it's also something that we have to acknowledge exists in the world. And it's not about going to after work parties or after hours dance clubs like this book is saying. That's complete hogwash. And I am so sorry that people publish books like this. Like, that is not the devil archetype. Let's not continue this new age myth that the devil archetype is supposed to be this like hidden positive thing. So I want to talk about the devil archetype for a little bit and why it's dangerous to dilute it and like rebrand it as something, wonderful and positive. Like, just let your hair down. Just let your inner beast out. It's like, no, not at all. Like, this archetype can actually be a very critical card in a reading. Very important for us to understand. And when we dilute it, not only are we lying to ourselves, but we're staying in denial. And that's like, if you do shadow work, denial is the biggest and the most difficult thing for us to get over. So here's an analogy that to me kind of illustrates the devil archetype. So let's say you don't brush your teeth for one day. You don't brush your teeth, no big deal. No one's gonna know that you didn't brush your teeth for one day. No one's gonna know. Let's say you go on a camping trip, you forget your toothbrush, and now you don't brush your teeth for 5 days. Kind of gross, maybe, if you're talking to someone, you have really bad breath. But it's still not that big of a deal. It's still not like catastrophic. Now let's say you don't brush your teeth for 2 years. And now you find yourself in the dentist chair, your teeth are rotten, thousands of dollars of medical bills, you're in pain, and you're like, wow, how did I get here? When did this happen, right? When did something benign and inconsequential, like I didn't brush my teeth for 1 day or 1 week, turn into now my teeth are rotten and I am devastated, right? When did that happen? Was it like the month mark or the 6-month mark or the year mark? When did that happen? And the answer is, it happened on day 1. It happened the first day that you decided not to brush your teeth. And that illustrates the devil archetype, is that it doesn't start off dangerous. It doesn't start off as something that you're worried about. It starts off very benign. It's a slow, gradual descent into danger and self-sabotage. Many times this archetype represents addiction or abusive behavior. And anyone who studied addiction or abusive behavior will tell you that abusers don't just start off being abusive. They don't just like go right out of the gate beating their wives. It's a slow descent. And in their mind, maybe they'll start to justify it or rationalize it and say things like, well, she deserved my abuse because, of this and that. Or an alcoholic will say, I deserve a drink because I had a rough week, or I deserve a drink because I worked so hard today, and this is totally harmless. And people drink all the time and their lives are fine. And then the next thing you know, for some people, when the devil archetype shows up, it takes something benign and it corrupts it. It corrupts you until the next thing you know, your teeth are rotten or you're an abuser or you're an alcoholic. And that is the power of the devil archetype. It is insidious in the sense that it fools you into thinking that it's not insidious. That you start off thinking that it's harmless, or you start off thinking, well, that wouldn't happen to me. I would never do that. And a little bit isn't gonna hurt me. Well, then a little bit more and a little bit more. And then the next thing you know, you're somewhere completely different, doing something very destructive, and you might not even realize it. So the power of the devil archetype is actually to face the truth of it and to acknowledge it within ourselves. When you pull the devil in a reading, it means you really need to have an honest conversation with yourself. And people have a very hard time doing that. It requires humility, right? You have to put your ego aside. It requires a comfortable dialogue with shame, right? You might have shameful behaviors or shameful tendencies that you have to acknowledge. And you also have to understand that you might not be in danger now, but the path that you're on could lead you to danger, could lead you to addiction, rotten teeth, self-sabotage, destruction. And one of the things that bothers me the most when these like new age tarot readers like try to make the devil a super positive card, and they're like, oh no, like they'll pull it up in a relationship reading and they'll be like, this is perfectly fine, you know, it just means that you guys have great sexual chemistry. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. No. In relationship readings, it has a tendency to talk about codependency or toxicity or narcissistic behavior or stalking or, toxic dynamics within the relationship. It's not about just great sex. Like, can we stop? Can we stop trying to take things and make them more palatable? Can we have enough courage to sit down and say, hey, let's have an honest discussion about this relationship. Is it really healthy? Are you really healthy? Are you in a good spot? Are there red flags here that seem benign, but over time could be dangerous, could lead you down a path where you find yourself becoming someone that you don't know or that you don't want to be? And I think that is the conversation that's missing when people pull the devil archetype, is because they're afraid. Like, it comes from a place of fear. If you find yourself taking cards that are inherently scary, like the devil or the tower or death, and you're trying to twist and manipulate and redefine those archetypes into only positive aspects, are you really doing yourself a service, or are you lying? And I feel like in this book, she's like, it feels like a lie. Feels like a lie. She even says, like, in here, if it was my last night on earth, what wild desires might I follow? And I'm like, that's not the devil. That's the reversed Hierophant. This is not about, letting your hair down and embracing your inner beast. The devil card is a warning sign. It's a conversation about maturity and humility. This is why the archetype matters. One of the things so you guys know I love history. I love history. I'm a history buff. And one of my favorite topics to study is, of course, World War II and the rise and fall of Hitler. And there were two books that come to mind when I think about the archetype of the devil. The first one is The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. This is a fantastic book if you really want to understand the nuances of how World War II came to be. And my biggest takeaway from this book is just how slow Hitler's rise to power was. Like, before, when I was studying World War II, they kind of like give you the cliff notes, and it's like Hitler did this and then that, and then he became in power. And what I like about The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich is it does like all the history before he became the party leader. And it starts talking about like how little things were set up and how slow and like the momentum grew, and how his ascent to power was very gradual. And it was an insidious process. It didn't just happen instantaneously. He didn't just build Nazis overnight. It was a slow poisoning. And that is what I think of when I think of the devil archetype. Most people didn't think that Hitler was harmful. Most people didn't, if they knew what he would have turned into, they would have never let him come to power. But it was slow. It was like a gradual brainwashing. If you read the book, which I highly recommend, it shows how a combination of like social pressure and denial and propaganda and self-deception and all these different things corrupted all these different groups of people, and it led them down this horrible, horrible path. And the other book that comes to mind is called Ordinary Men, which is also a book about Nazis in World War II. And it's another great representation of the devil archetype because it talks about how average individuals, people like you and me, had the capacity for evil under certain circumstances. And there's a humility that comes with it when we recognize that you and I are not special, that if put under the right circumstances of stress and anxiety, fear, panic, propaganda, if you add the right ingredients to somebody, you can turn them into evil. And that was the whole concept of the book Ordinary Men. It's basically how ordinary men became Nazis, right? How they were able to be these perpetrators of horrific acts. And that lurking darkness within all of us is part of our humanity. Now, of course, if you look at the history of humanity, humans are no strangers to genocide, right? I mean, the Nazis are one example, but, if you look in history, every single country, every single race, at some point in some time in history, committed genocide and horrific atrocities. This isn't anything new. It's part of our makeup as humans. And even though, hopefully, none of us are going to do that, none of us are going to become Nazis, there's still a lesson to be learned in here. We still have to acknowledge that evil exists and that there is right and wrong, and there is right and wrong desires, and it is a slippery slope that can be very slow and insidious. We might not think that having a drink means that we're going to be an alcoholic, or not brushing our teeth means we're going to ruin our mouth. But for some people, that is how they get trapped. And it starts with a lie. It starts with something benign, something slow. And it creeps up on you, and that is how it gets you. And I think that's what I would want to explore when we're talking about the devil archetype, instead of this new age bullcrap, this new age dilution of taking something that's actually really horrific and really fascinating to talk about, which is the devil archetype. And yet they're turning it into something palatable and positive and empowering. No, darling, no. Let's talk about evil. Let's talk about humans' capacity for evil, because it exists, and it exists in all of us. It's not special to one race or one period of time. The devil archetype is a cautionary tale, and it exists. We all get challenged every day and in certain points of our life. And some of us do fall into that trap, and it's very, very painful to get out. Whether it's an abusive relationship, whether it's stalking an ex, whether it's intrusive thoughts, whether it's self-harm, whether it's negative behaviors, the list goes on and on. The layers and the diversity in the devil archetype is phenomenally interesting, but let's not dilute it. Let's not sugarcoat it, okay? Let's not write trashy books. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to call this book trashy. I'm sure it's a great book. But let's not dilute humanity, to make it more palatable, let's actually talk about the darker tendencies in mankind and acknowledge the darker tendencies in ourselves, right? Because that is the conversation I want to have when I pull the Devil card. I want to know what conscious or unconscious forces are controlling me. How am I screwing up my own life? What am I lying to myself about? How is denial blinding me? How am I rationalizing my behavior and justifying behavior that's ultimately terrible for me? That's what I want to know. And we need to have a lot of courage to face that. You need to have courage to have those conversations. And I really wish that tarot readers and people who study these archetypes can have the humility and the courage to acknowledge when this seeps into our life. Anyway, I hope you all are doing well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Devil archetype. Are you one of those people who have repackaged it and renamed it into something cutesy and empowering, or are you one of those people who also likes to face horror and evil and dive into the darker aspects of humanity? So I'd love to hear your opinions on that. And till next time, everyone, take care.